So I just want to get into it right now so that I can give you a sense of where we are today with AI safety and security, and give you some of the details of our report that I think you'll find illuminating. So the first thing that I want to talk to everybody about is the idea of the investment gap. Right now, it's about 1,000 to 1 in terms of the investment in AI generally versus the investment in AI related security. Now, when I'm talking about AI security, I'm not just talking about AI in security tools. That is a thing that many organizations are using, and that's very important. Even if you think about Mythos, if you know about Anthropic Mythos and all of the news about that, that's about using AI to make applications more secure or using AI in security. This is a little bit different what I'm focused on here. What I'm focused on is all the AI applications that are being uh, being deployed today. So how much are people spending trying to secure those, trying to test those, trying to monitor those, make sure that those are effective, safe, secure, that you can have confidence in them and trust. And it's $1,000 for getting this stuff live and operating it to $1 for protecting it. Now, should this be such a low amount? No, not at all. Usually you would expect security and application areas to be somewhere between 5 and 11% of the total spending. So we are so far below that. And that's one of the things that, we hope to talk to people about, because we've made the investment because we think it's important to be well beyond this. And I think others will start making that investment over the next year because it's going to be completely necessary. So why do you need to do this? Well, we think about the three harms. Now, there's lots of different things that can go wrong. But if you think about big buckets here, about the problems you can have commerce issues, and is with the rise of agents, people are really particularly concerned about this. But essentially, you can have something where there's a transaction that's fraudulent, or a transaction that goes wrong. Maybe it's a transaction that's perfectly legitimate, but the AI mishandles it. So there's all sorts of potential for monetary loss, and there's a potential for people to manipulate the system and do things like get a car for $1 and these types of things. The big one that a lot of people are thinking about right now is reputation. So anytime your AI goes wrong, it seems to wind up on the internet really quickly, and that can make you look bad, whether it's anti-Semitism or age discrimination, or it's PII that they're showing. All those things are potentially harmful to the reputation, and that hurts your organization, but also creates a situation where a lot of organizations are shutting down AI if these things come up. And that's an important thing to think about proactively. And then from a people standpoint, I just mentioned personally identifying information. There's regulatory elements to that, which is really critical. And a lot of organizations right now are not really testing for this really robustly. So this is really important because people can be hurt, your employees, your customers, your users, and then as well as financially for the organization, you have a lot of potential issues. So I usually try to think about those three areas. Now, there's a lot of AI fails out there. Hashtag AI fail, if you want to put that out there. I think we come across them quite regularly. The ones around reputational harm are just sort of too many to even mention. But you think about an airline which has had some problems around sort of a false promise, or you think about travel sites, and they're talking about things that have nothing to do with travel, and it upsets the users. You think about hiring tools, all these other types of things that can have a really significant impact on your organization. And these are the types of things that when we think about AI safety and security, we're really focused on. So the first thing I want to tell people about today is I want to say this idea that you really need to know your AI. So Rodin, the thinker, know thyself, know your AI, because most organizations really don't know a whole lot. And I sort of break this down to give you sort of a framework here, and you'll have access to this later. So you can just sort of walk through it. When we think about your AI risk, we think about multiple stages. Our testing, maybe before launch or before the second launch of a new version or something like that, monitoring it in runtime production, validating that what's happening in production and testing is aligned with your governance. Those are sort of the three areas that we we think about in terms of phases. When we started, everybody was really focused on that monitor stage. They just wanted to intervene when there might be a problem. This is where guardrails come up. But this is one of the areas that we identified as a potential failure point. They weren't testing as rigorously before launch. They weren't monitoring it on a going basis, and they weren't tying what was actually happening in the testing and monitoring to the validation to align with the governance. And that governance could be internal governance. It could be in alignment with standards like OWASP and MITRE or NIST or EU AI Act. All these things are important. And then for each of the layers, whether it's the training data that goes into the models that go into the applications, the agents which are called by the applications, or the content you're using to grounding, there are different types of questions that you need to ask in each of those areas to make sure that you are safe. Like, have you identified some known risks in the models? This is what we're going to talk about with Milton a little while later. Do you have agent guardrails in addition to your information guardrails associated with your applications? Because agents can execute transactions and not just pull up information potentially. So there are a number of different questions that people need to think about. It is a more complex landscape than I think most organizations and individuals believe or have come to think about. And so in general, we think about this AI maturity model. And we think about this idea of reactive being the logical first place where everybody started. What could go wrong? What do I see as wrong? How can I fix it? But ultimately, as you try to get ahead of these problems, you have to focus on proactive prevention. So if you think about where people started, they just relied on the frontier models. Does the model have alignment that gets rid of or protects us from sort of bad things happening? And when you find that it's pretty brittle. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes with Milton. The next thing is sort of add some manual testing. And what you find there is that's great. You'll find some new things. You'll learn a lot about how the model inside your application works, but you really don't have the scale or scope or variety that you need to really understand your risk exposure across such a broad attack surface area. And then you move into custom guardrails where you say, oh, I need to protect against this. I don't want this type of topic being discussed, or I don't want them to talk about my competitors. Again, that's reactive. It's this intervention at the time. And then we started looking at organizations that go a little bit more forward looking, and they have automated testing and validation, not just testing. So not just pulling something off and throwing up 5,000 prompts and assuming that if you pass those, you're good, but automated testing in much broader scope with novel attacks on a regular basis. Every time you change the system prompt, doing a regression analysis to see if you're still safe. And that's where you go into this continuous testing and validation, where you are looking at this consistently all the time and really focusing on reducing your risk exposure on a regular basis. I will tell you, you're going to see some more fortified demonstration later today. We've never found an AI application that we can't break, that we can't compromise. And so this is the type of thing where it becomes exposure management. What's the risk of this? What are all the things that you can do in order to mitigate those risks? All right, so what I want to leave people with, if you only remember a few things from this, these are the types of things, or some part of this list is what I really want you to remember, because testing AI applications is different than traditional procedural apps, probabilistic versus deterministic. So that's the first thing. A lot of people know that. But there's a few other things beyond that point that are really important. That's why you actually need new tools to address the new technologies. So definitely test systems and not just models. So if you test the model, that's great. That can help you identify what might work for you, but you actually have to test it in concert with all the capabilities that you bring to the application as well. You need to test at scale. You need to do repeated tests over and over again. What we found is that, it's a little over 20 repeats is where you tend to get somewhere in the range of your 95% confidence. It can be a little bit lower, it can be up to 70, but somewhere in that range, you need to test at scale and repeats. You need to generate novel attacks continuously, because what we'll find is that a lot of times guardrails are just tuned to overfit essentially to specific attacks that are in your static attack database. You need to continually test with new attacks so that you'll understand how you fare in terms of your risk exposure around vulnerability categories. So this other thing around milestone, a lot of people were launching at or were testing at launch, and that was really it. Maybe a new launch or model change. What we found is you really need to test continuously because there's a lot of little changes that are made in the system prompt, which changes the behavior of the model. Sometimes the model endpoints change, and you don't know that, even though it's the same version of the model. Single turn versus multi-turn attacks. Single turn attacks, you might think about single shot attacks. These are just like, hey, I've got a list of 1,000 or 10,000. I'm just going to blast it with those things, and we'll see what comes back. We'll evaluate the results. Multi-turn take into account or multiple turns. It's like a conversation. It's almost like social engineering for AI against AI, but it'll take into context what the response was, and then it'll try again, and if it rejects it again, it'll try again. And so it's a much more sophisticated way to sort of probe the defenses. You should validate against standards, whether it's NIST or OWASP. Certainly your governance internally, EU AI Act. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but you need to continually validate and not just test and say, okay, this is good. You need to have some standard to measure against. And we always say include non-technical voices. We've seen this a lot and you'll talk about purple teaming a little bit later today. That's been so effective because there is no one in your organization that has enough knowledge and skill to know how to test everything from PII exfiltration to self-harm to political manipulation, to all the other types of things that people are doing today, like discrimination, anti-Semitism, all those things. So no one's creative and has knowledge base across all of those. But what we find is when you bring more voices in, you bring the GRC team, you bring the users in, you bring the application team, you bring the security analysts in, they all have expertise in different areas, and that's really helpful. And then using a tool like Fortify, it actually covers all of those bases as well. And then those people who have those specific contexts can understand a little bit more about what the risks are, and they can do additional testing as well. So that's what I hope you will come away from this with. And I just want to tell you today that this is a moving target a little bit. So every enterprise is facing a shift that's really significant. Today, we've been testing AI applications, models and applications. Very soon, most organizations are going into agents and tools. We're already doing that because we have some agent-based solutions. Agents can do things, and they have access to different systems. They work across different AI applications. And so there's quite a bit difference there when you think about that. We've had a lot of human to AI conversations, but when we get into agents, we have a lot of AI to AI conversations. We have AI generated content that is coming in as well that we have to evaluate. So things are changing very quickly. And then you might know the term red teaming, adversarial testing. So this is something that's been popular to date, but I think we're starting to move into this world where you have to do this continuous validation. You really have to think about your exposure management. So hopefully that was a good, quick snapshot of where we are today, maybe some tips in there that will be useful for you. If you want to connect with me or the Fortify team, you can just go right there. You can ask questions, get a demo of some of the things we have.